Fred and George are among my favorite characters in the Harry Potter movies, but I'm hoping the upcoming HBO TV remake makes some much-needed changes to their characters. Like most book-to-screen adaptations, the Warner Bros. Harry Potter films were forced to leave a great deal of the story out. The TV remake, on the other hand, will have the benefit of a lot more time to include the nuances of characters and plotlines. In the case of Fred and George, I hope this means that their own personalities will be a little more fleshed out. Pranksters and entrepreneurs, the Weasley twins were the central comedic force of the Harry Potter series, both in the books and movies. James and Oliver Phelps did phenomenal jobs bringing Fred and George to life, and I find myself unable to imagine anyone else while reading the Harry Potter books. Their comedic timing was excellent, especially considering their ages when they first began playing the twins, and their mischievous nature was always evident on screen. I have no criticism whatsoever for the Phelpses' portrayals, but the way Fred and George were written for the movies is another matter. Fred and George didn't have their own identities in the Harry Potter movies. The HBO remake must treat Fred and George as individuals. Fred, James Phelps, and George Weasley, Oliver Phelps, in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 1. Fred and George were essentially a single unit in the Harry Potter movies. Unless another character specifically pointed out who was who, it was difficult to tell on screen which was Fred and which was George, but it never really mattered much. They spoke at the same time and did all the same things, to the point that the Weasley twins are often treated like a single character with a unified arc in the movies. While this is somewhat true for the books, the garbling of their individuality was far less pronounced since the text always identified who Harry was speaking to. Since the Harry Potter books made it much easier to tell the Weasley twins apart, their own unique traits began to shine through. They were both certainly mischievous and too clever for their own good, but Fred tended to be the more playful and fearless of the pair. This also meant he was a tad more aggressive and more gung-ho to pick on Ron or blackmail Ludo Bagman to collect the money he owed them. On the other hand, George was, slightly, more reserved and calculated and provided a voice of reason when Fred took things too far. The movies giving Fred and George shared dialogue didn't help. Fred and George's shared lines were fun, but only harmed their characters. The main reason that the Harry Potter movies failed to communicate Fred and George's differences is that they were often given overlapping dialogue. The Phelps brothers were given nearly all the same lines and had to either deliver them simultaneously or volley the words back and forth. Many of these sentences, such as their instructions about the Marauders map, were so complicated that it gave the impression that Fred and George were sharing a mind, and this made it seem even more like they lacked their own thoughts and personalities. Aesthetically, Fred and George's quirky line delivery made their roles in the Harry Potter movies all the more whimsical, and it's now difficult to imagine them any other way. However, with the trade-off being the character's individuality, it simply isn't worth it. I would love to see HBO's TV remake take a different route, giving the new actors coming in to play Fred and George more of their own lines and even some time alone on screen. After all, the Weasley twin stories don't end the same, and the Harry Potter movies demonstrate that if Fred and George's individuality isn't respected, their individual stories won't land the same way. Cutting Fred's death scene was one of Deathly Hallows' greater crimes. The Harry Potter movies continued to ignore the Weasley twins' individuality all the way to Fred's death. A blended image features the Weasley twins over Hogwarts with one of the twins in black and white. Like many other Harry Potter fans, I cried the hardest in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows when Fred Weasley died. I never saw it coming, and the fact that he died while laughing at his own joke made it all the more bitter. Add in Percy Weasley's screams of regret, and it is still one of the most devastating scenes I have ever read in YA literature. For this reason, I was outraged to see that the Deathly Hallows Part 2 movie stripped the scene away. Instead, Fred's body was only shown in the Great Hall, and in keeping with the film's traditions, it wasn't immediately clear whether it was Fred or George who had died. By cutting the actual scene in which Fred died, the Harry Potter movies again stripped the twins of their individuality. Fred and Percy had been fighting side by side when the corridor unexpectedly exploded, and this was significant since their own relationship was especially contentious. As much as I personally dislike Percy, it was heartwarming to see them actually joking around together, and it felt like a massive step in Fred's personal arc since George wasn't even around as this happened. By cutting all this, the Harry Potter movies again cheapened this version of the twins' characters.